As Krivax began writing the transcript of the meeting between Malygos and the Council of Six, he couldn't help but feel like things had completely gone off the rails. Not only was Malygos forcing the Order of Kalchut to reveal itself to the High King, which was mostly a good thing as far as he was concerned, but the crazy dragon had also been casually dropping world-changing information throughout the entire meeting. Krivax could already picture the room full of viziers that would be frantically analyzing the transcript in front of him. Malygos had all but confirmed to Azrael-Nerub that Kalimdor truly existed and that it was inhabited by mortals who were at least powerful enough to be compared to Dalaran. That didn't even begin to touch on the demigod comment that Malygos made, which was guaranteed to catch the attention of the circle of viziers. There was also that reveal about elves being descended from trolls. I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a field day with that. However, none of that could compare in terms of importance to the existence of the dragon aspects and the corruption of Deathwing. He had every expectation that the High King would react strongly once he was informed about the existential threat that was Deathwing. Krivax just wished that he didn't need to be there when he heard about it. According to what Hadix told him, the Order of Kalchut had continued to remain reluctant to reveal itself to the High King, even after they had been told about Malygos' ultimatum. They apparently had a difficult time believing that Malygos was truly as powerful as Krivax and Hadix had told them. That lasted for all of a single day before Malygos somehow got wind of their reluctance and decided to show them the error of their ways. Krivax didn't know how Malygos learned about the issue so quickly or what he did to convince them otherwise, but the Order of Kalchut was now reluctantly on board with abandoning their secrecy. He probably used some kind of ridiculously overpowered divination magic, Krivax mused to himself. I would have loved to get the chance to watch Malygos scare the hell out of someone who wasn't me. It'd probably make me feel a bit better about the whole thing. After a decision had been made, the Order frantically started to plan the best way to present themselves to the High King in as sympathetic of a light as possible. Krivax could guess that a large part of that would be them doing everything they could to hide their more controversial actions while simultaneously gathering evidence of the good that they had done for Azrael-Nerub over the millennia. In addition, they also wanted to prove to the High King that he would need them, which was why Krivax had been provided with an elixir of perfect recall and told to write the transcript. All of these preparations had taken several weeks, which was enough time for Hadix to get all his limbs back, much to Krivax's relief. Hadix assured him that High King was extremely unlikely to do anything dumb or drastic like having them all executed for treason. Anubarak was widely considered to be a wise leader who rarely acted on emotion, so he would probably do what was best for Azrael-Nerub regardless of his personal feelings on the matter. Hadix predicted that Anubarak would, at worst, force the Order to be dissolved and reformed as a formal organization under his command. Still, there was no guarantee that everything was going to turn out all right. Rulers aren't generally known for reacting well to learning that their subjects are ignoring their authority and keeping important secrets related to national security. A secret conspiracy as pervasive as the Order of Kalchut, no matter how benevolent they might be, could be considered to be a direct threat to the High King's power. Vizier Hadix, why are we the ones who need to reveal the Order to the High King? Krivax asked, not for the first time. Shouldn't something like this be handled by people who aren't us? A member of the Order's leadership will be in attendance as well, Krivax, Hadix patiently responded, not bothering to look away from his spellweaving. We have been ordered to join them because I am the one who was investigating Deathwing, and you are the one who has had the most contact with Malygos. Krivax dearly wished that those reasons were less compelling than they were. And you're certain that the High King won't decide to have us imprisoned, killed, or exiled? Certainty does not exist. There's every chance that the High King could suddenly take actions contrary to the way that he has ruled for the past millennia, Hadix said solemnly. However, it is exceedingly unlikely that he will actually do so. Then why are you preparing such a complex long-distance teleportation spell for the meeting? Hadix glanced at him with a mildly impressed expression before responding, I'm glad to see that you haven't allowed your diplomatic duties to prevent you from continuing your learning. Krivax perked up at the praise. He'd been putting a lot of effort into his spatial magic recently, as being able to easily travel long distances would open up a lot of options for him. As for why I'm preparing the spell, I have not lived as long as I have by refusing to prepare for events simply because they are unlikely. Krivax didn't have much to say about that, so he simply continued to write his transcript in silence. Hadix must have been watching him carefully, because he decided to speak up as soon as Krivax finished writing the last word. "If you are done, then we should leave as soon as we can. It would not do to be late for a meeting as important as this one." "Understood, I'm ready to go," said Krivax, quickly storing the transcript in his spatial bag. Krivax followed behind his mentor as the two of them began making their way to the portal to Inkilla. Once there, it wouldn't take long to reach another portal that would take them to the city of Azrael-Nerub, where they would meet the High King. "At least there's no way that this meeting will be as terrifying as my last one." Anubarak could sense the tension of the council chamber's hidden guards as they waited for the arrival of his unexpected guests. Their caution was warranted given the circumstances. When several of the kingdom's most powerful viziers used their political influence to arrange a meeting with the High King, while refusing to explain the meeting's actual purpose, it was wise to be suspicious. When those viziers requested that the meeting be held privately with the High King without his counsel, it was perhaps time to grow worried. If Anubarak was not as certain as he could be that there had not been any preparations made for an attempted coup, he would have never agreed to the meeting in the first place. If he had not received several reports over the past few weeks detailing the suspicious behavior of many viziers who were suspected of being associated with the mysterious conspiracy manipulating the politics of his kingdom, Anubarak may have still declined. What he needed the most was to gather more information, and the circumstances of this meeting promised just that, regardless of how suspicious it was. That was why Anubarak decided to call for his most loyal Dread Stalkers as well as several Obsidian Destroyers to protect both him and the only council member who he had refused to be sent away. Anubarak glanced down at Elder Nadox and saw that the vizier was still speaking quietly into his scrying crystal. After a few minutes, Elder Nadox finished his conversation and turned his attention back to his Anubarak. "Your Majesty, Vizier Hadix and Vizier Krivax have both passed through the portal from Inkilla to Azrael-Nerub and will arrive in approximately 20 minutes. The Dread Stalkers are following them both closely and have failed to notice anything suspicious. Elder Noxter of Nazanak has already arrived and is waiting outside of the council chambers." "They are a strange group," Anubarak commented. "Have our investigations had any success in identifying a connection between our guests?" "None aside from the obvious, Your Majesty," said Elder Nadox, his tone regretful. "They are all suspected of being involved in the conspiracy, but there is little connection to be found otherwise. Vizier Hadix has met with Elder Noxter on a few occasions while in Nazanak, but there are only a few recorded incidents of them speaking over several centuries. Vizier Krivax has never met Elder Noxter, nor has he ever gone to Nazanak, but that is unsurprising given his relative youth." Anubarak could feel his disappointment grow at the answer. He was beginning to grow increasingly frustrated with the veil of secrecy that obscured these viziers. Anubarak momentarily considered dealing with them in a more heavy-handed manner, but those thoughts disappeared as quickly as they came. Elder Noxter was a close confidant of Underking Anubesit and was one of the most politically influential viziers in Nazanak. Although Vizier Hadix lacked such political influence, he was a powerful enough mage that it would be unwise to confront him without gathering more information first. After mages reached a certain degree of power, accurately evaluating what they were truly capable of tended to become difficult. Anubarak would simply continue to remain patient and learn as much from this meeting as possible. "Your Majesty, Vizier Hadix and Vizier Krivax have arrived at the cigarette's entrance," said Elder Nadox, pulling Anubarak from his thoughts. "The guards are confiscating their spatial bags and have begun searching them for enchanted items. Neither of them has shown any reluctance to the procedure. Instruct the guards to escort them here once they are done," said Anubarak. "I see no reason to delay this meeting when doing so will accomplish nothing aside from increasing the tension of my guards." "Yes, Your Majesty." Anubarak noticed one of the dread stalkers on the ceiling shifting nervously after being directly referenced. The High King made a mental note to inspect the discipline of his guards later, but quickly turned his attention to the council chamber's entrance. He didn't have to wait for very long before his guests were escorted in. Elder Noxter and Vizier Hadix were both wearing the typical inscrutable expressions that could be found on most experienced viziers, but Vizier Krivax's expression was much more open. Anubarak was easily able to tell that the young vizier was quite nervous, and perhaps even afraid, which was already enough to cause his curiosity to grow. It made little sense to him that the viziers would bring someone whose reactions were so readily apparent. Any lies that they told would be far more obvious with Vizier Krivax in attendance. What are they planning? Anubarak allowed his confusion to show as a guard followed behind them, while carrying a stack of documents. Our guests insisted on retrieving those documents from their spatial bags before they were confiscated, Elder Nadox explained quietly. They've already been inspected for potential curses, so I allowed the guards to bring them in. Anubarak nodded to signal his approval. The documents implied that the viziers before him intended to voluntarily share important information. Not what I expected. Seeing no point in continuing to speculate when the answers were right in front of him, Anubarak decided to simply wait for the viziers to begin speaking. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Your Majesty," said Elder Noxter, taking the leading role in speaking for the group. "You and your colleagues made it quite difficult to refuse," said Anubarak with obvious censure in his voice. "I hope that this meeting is as important as you've implied. You would not like the consequences of wasting my time or requesting that I dismiss my council if this matter is a frivolous one. We would not dare go to such lengths for anything but the most paramount of concerns, Your Majesty," said Elder Noxter, in a tone of voice that was more deferential than Anubarak would have liked. In his experience, people only acted overly servile when they knew that they were about to tell him something that he didn't want to hear, so Anubarak was already preparing for the worst. "I have come here to present to you news of multiple existential threats to the safety of Azrael Nerub. I sincerely believe that a High King as wise and intelligent as yourself will understand why we took the measures that we did once you have been made fully aware of the situation." Anubarak ignored the blatant flattery and shared a surprised glance with Elder Nadox. Neither of them had known what to expect from the viziers, but they had both anticipated something much more aggressive from the conspirators. "What existential threats do you speak of, and why have they not been brought to our attention before now?" Elder Nadox asked pointedly. "For what reason would a vizier from Nazanak know more about what threatens our kingdom than the High King, and why have you come with two viziers whose duties have them on an entirely different continent?" Anubarak could see the tension among the three viziers increase dramatically once faced with a direct question. Vizier Hadix and Vizier Krivax have both agreed to be here because they were both directly involved in several important events, and because they are both members of our organization, said Elder Noxter. Anubarak allowed none of his shock to show when the vizier so brazenly admitted to the existence of their secret organization. "I'm confident that you've become aware of some of our actions in recent times, Your Majesty. The Order of Kalchut would like to make clear that we are both loyal to you, and that we seek to do nothing but protect Azrael Nerub as best we can as we have for millennia." Anubarak remained silent once the vizier finished speaking and took a moment to study the viziers in front of him. Elder Noxter was doing his best to feign that he was calm, but Anubarak had been dealing with politics for most of his life, and he could see the tension in his body. Vizier Hadix was also feigning calm, but Anubarak could tell that the vizier was tense and prepared to cast a spell at any moment. Interestingly, Vizier Hadix seemed to be leaning slightly toward Vizier Krivax, likely intending to protect his student should anything go wrong. Anubarak couldn't tell whether or not Vizier Krivax was actually attempting to hide his expressions, but the young vizier was clearly extremely nervous. The High King could feel that his dread stalkers were alert and ready to take action the moment he ordered them to do so. After taking a moment to consider his options, Anubarak decided to ease the tension before someone acted foolishly. "Explain yourself, now," Anubarak ordered. Elder Noxter bowed and began to respond with visible relief in his expression. Of course, you. Not you, Anubarak interrupted before turning his gaze to the youngest vizier in the group. Vizier Krivax, you will be the one to explain this order of Kalchut to me. Why, Your Majesty? Vizier Krivax is merely a few years old, Sorel. He is the worst liar out of all of you, and I tire of being fed falsehoods, said Anubarak, glaring at Elder Noxter and interrupting him for the second time. You and your organization have proven yourself willing to deceive me for my entire reign. I have no interest in listening to whatever story you intend to sell me, Elder Noxter. If you do not believe Vizier Krivax to be sufficiently qualified to speak for your organization, then you should have considered that before bringing him here. Anubarak knew that he made the correct decision once he saw Elder Noxter glance at Vizier Krivax apprehensively. Vizier Krivax, know that my protection is available to you if you are being coerced, said Anubarak, causing the anxious young vizier to slightly startle. From everything that he had seen so far, he doubted that Vizier Krivax was being forced to do anything against his will, but Anubarak felt compelled to make the offer regardless. Given your relative youth, you could not have been a member of this organization for particularly long. Vizier Krivax looked to his mentor for guidance on how to proceed, but he quickly calmed down and resolved himself once it became clear that he would be receiving none. Your Majesty, I really don't know as much about the order as Elder Noxter, but I will explain things as best that I can. I think I should start by explaining to you what the Void is, and then share what I was told about the Order's history. Anubarak listened patiently as the young vizier did just that. Despite the fact that Vizier Krivax lacked the ability to successfully lie to him, Anubarak didn't actually believe everything that he was being told. Withholding accurate information from younger or less trusted members was common practice for any organization with something to hide. Still, hearing what the Order of Kalchut told its new members was valuable, even if that information was not necessarily accurate. Or at least, that's what Anubarak thought until he expressed skepticism about the threat of the Void, only for Elder Noxter to eagerly offer to perform a demonstration that was traditionally given to their new members. Anubarak carefully considered the risks before agreeing and allowing the vizier to retrieve a bottle of concentrated Void from his spatial bag. The Dread Stalkers positioned themselves so that they could immediately skewer Elder Noxter at the first sign of treachery, but the vizier did nothing aside from retrieving a bottle that contained some kind of squirming pitch-black substance. As soon as the bottle's stopper was removed, Anubarak could immediately feel a strange sense of malice emanating from the substance. Elder Noxter didn't hesitate to throw the bottle at a non-sapient skitter that had been called for the demonstration, causing it to quickly begin screeching in pain. Anubarak would not have considered the Void to be any more dangerous than a common alchemical acid if it wasn't for what happened next. Throughout the entire demonstration, he had been telepathically connected with the skitterer so that he could more accurately determine the effects of this so-called Void. That was why he could feel that connection began being corrupted only for some manner of strange and alien intelligence to slowly start taking over the skitter's mind. Once he felt that intelligence noticed him, Anubarak ended his telepathic connection as quickly as he could. Kill it. Now. Anubarak immediately ordered. It was only after he wasn't focused on the skitterer's mind that he noticed the physical changes that were taking place to the creature. They were not pleasant. Vizier Hadix didn't hesitate to burn the creature to ashes with a stream of flames. The council room was silent for several moments as Anubarak and Elder Nadox processed what they had just seen. I can see why such a demonstration is considered to be traditional. It is quite effective. Once he finished composing himself, Anubarak suppressed his anger at having the existence of something so dangerous hidden from him and calmly ordered Vizier Krivax to continue his explanations. Unfortunately, the more that Vizier Krivax spoke, the more difficult Anubarak found it to contain his anger. Halfway through, he ordered the viziers to present any documents that they had brought that contained information about their organization. Reading through a complete list of their members did nothing to calm Anubarak down. The Order of Kalchut's membership list contained the names of many of the most powerful viziers in his kingdom, including a member of his very own council, Seer Exit. When the young vizier began explaining why the Order of Kalchut refused to recruit from the other castes, Anubarak expected Elder Noxter to interject with a correction. When he didn't, the High King finally lost control of his patience. "Allow me to repeat your explanation so that I can be certain that I'm understanding the situation correctly," said Anubarak, his voice low and menacing. "Your organization has hidden vital information from the rightful leaders of Azrael Nerub for the past 10,000 years because you believe that Spider Lords and Queens are too incapable of properly protecting themselves from the void. Is that correct?" "Of course not, Your Majesty. We have nothing but the highest respect for the kingdom's Spider Lords and Queens," Elder Noxter hurriedly denied. "It's simply that viziers are more proficient in using magic to shield their minds from the void's influence." "I don't believe you," Anubarak immediately responded, shooting the vizier a glare cold enough to make him flinch. "Would you like to know what I believe to be your organization's genuine motivations? I think it's far more likely that you all hid yourselves due to actual necessity at first until you all received a taste of power and decided that you didn't wish to share. If I investigate your members, I highly suspect to find that your organization uses its influence to elevate them beyond what they deserve. Is that assumption correct, Elder Noxter?" The vizier very wisely decided to keep silent. Anubarak was glad. He wasn't quite sure how he would have responded if the fool tried to feed him another lie. Anubarak turned his gaze to Vizier Hadix before continuing to speak. "If your history in particular is any indication, then the Order of Kalchut seems to be more than willing to use its power to subvert our justice system. Or do you intend to tell me that it is a mere coincidence that your mentor was found to be guilty of practicing dangerous magics? Does your organization always recruit the students of the void corrupted viziers that it extrajudicially assassinates?" "No, it does not," said Vizier Hadix, a flash of anger crossing his expression as he spoke up for the first time. "I have never agreed with the Order's decision to recruit from only the vizier caste, but you are mistaken if you believe that our actions have been only self-serving. We have prevented several potential catastrophes throughout your reign, and we've come to you now because we've been confronted with a threat that we cannot handle alone." Anubarak knew that Vizier Hadix was attempting to draw his focus away from the Order's deeds and toward whatever it was that threatened Azrael Nerub, but he decided to allow the change in topic. His duty was to act in the best interests of his kingdom, regardless of his personal feelings. "Explain to me what these threats are," said Anubarak, directing his order to Vizier Krivax. "Yes, Your Majesty. There are a few documents that detail them in great detail." Anubarak listened quietly as Vizier Krivax weaved a tale about mind-manipulating magic and potential void cultists hiding among the human nations. He listened as the vizier spoke about a corrupted dragon that was large enough to kill a spider lord with a single claw and collapse their kingdom's tunnels down on their heads. He continued to remain silent as he spoke about his meeting with another mad dragon who possessed magical power that far exceeded even the most powerful of viziers. Once Vizier Krivax was finished speaking, Anubarak said nothing beyond ordering the viziers to remain quiet as he read through the documents that they had brought and decided what to do with them. Anubarak quickly scanned through the documents. Many of them described events in which the Order of Kalchut supposedly saved Azrael Nerub from potential threats throughout the years. He set those aside first and began reading through the transcript of Vizier Krivax's meeting with the Council of Six and the dragon known as Malagos. Anubarak paused halfway through reading when the document referenced a demigod who lived on a continent named Kalimdor, and cited a separate report which contained information on the Order's investigation into the Kirin Tor. As he read through the multiple recorded references to Kalimdor, Anubarak could feel some of his anger being replaced by a weary exasperation. Another continent? Truly? His mind turned to Azrael Nerub's efforts to construct a navy before he forced himself to refocus on the matter at hand. Anubarak ignored the tension in the room as he silently read through the rest of the documents. Once he was done, the High King fell into deliberation as he analyzed everything that he had learned and attempted to settle on the best course of action. Eventually, Anubarak reached a conclusion and his voice cut through the silence. "From this point onward, the Order of Kalchut no longer exists. I will be sending immediate orders for its dissolution as soon as this meeting has been concluded. as well as orders for a thorough investigation into their activities and historical records. Anubarak simply could not allow such a powerful organization to exist outside of his control. The Order of Kalchut in its current form was an explicit threat to the authority of not only him, but also every High King who came after him. He also needed to know definitively how much of what he had been told was the truth, and that was not something that Anubarak could establish without a full investigation. However, the Void was still a genuine threat to the safety of Azrael-Nerub. If these old gods were not merely legends meant to fool impressionable hatchlings, and his people had originated from their essence, then the Void would always be a unique threat to the safety and autonomy of his people. Anubarak studied the reactions of the viziers. Elder Noxter was wearing a stunned expression, but Vizier Hadik seemed much calmer, while Vizier Krivax looked to be relieved. The High King continued once he saw that none of them were foolish enough to protest. A new organization will be created that will be dedicated to protecting Azrael-Nerub from the Void and taking on the Order's duties. This organization will be directly under the kingdom's control and will include members of all castes. The former members of the Order of Kalchut may or may not find themselves reassigned to this organization from their current duties. Such an organization was necessary, and it gave Anubarak an excuse to potentially push troublesome viziers from important roles by reassigning them away from their positions of power. It would have to be done slowly so as to not cause excessive political turmoil, but Anubarak had no intention of ignoring those who had shown themselves to be unworthy of trust. After today, Seer Ixit would certainly not be on his council. Anubarak pushed those thoughts away and prepared himself to give an order that no High King had given in 15 millennia. Elder Nadox, once this meeting is over, call for an emergency gathering of my council. Inform them that Azrael-Nerub will be going to war against the Horde and that we must discuss the necessary preparations. We will also need to decide on who will be sent to aid Dalaran in securing the Dragon Soul. The effect of his words was immediate as every single Nerubian in the room showed expressions of surprise. War? Your Majesty, are you certain? Anubarak nodded solemnly, I am. If our investigations validate what I've been told to be true, then Deathwing is an existential threat to Azrael-Nerub and the Horde are being used as his tools. That is absolutely unacceptable. If our safety requires the defeat of the Horde, the retrieval of the Dragon Soul, and the destruction of Deathwing, then we will do everything in our power to achieve those goals. Not only that, but constructing additional settlements in the Eastern Kingdoms has now become a necessity. We can't afford to not have a presence there when the next threat appears. Once his reasoning was explained, Elder Nadox seemed to quickly find himself in agreement. Yes, Your Majesty. Good. Elder Noxter, you may return to Nazanak. Your presence is no longer required, Anubarak said dismissively. Vizier Hadix and Vizier Krivax, you both have much experience with the Eastern Kingdoms. You stay for a while so that you can answer any questions my council might have about either the Order, the Void, or the Eastern Kingdoms. In time, all of Azrael-Nerub's leadership would know of the Void, its origins, and its dangers so that they would be prepared. But for now, only a select few would be informed of the situation until the investigations were over. Anubarak had no intention of hiding what he had learned from his own advisors. As soon as the two viziers expressed their agreement and Elder Nadox left to carry out his instructions, Anubarak ceased paying attention to them and focused on planning for the coming war. Despite everything that he had learned since the discovery of the Eastern Kingdoms, Anubarak still firmly believed that Azrael-Nerub was the most powerful civilization in the world. He had no doubt that the rest of the world would soon share his opinion. As Krivax walked through the streets of Dalaran while making his way to the Violet Hold, he couldn't help but feel a strange sort of pride. That was perhaps a strange thing to feel while walking toward a magical prison, but Krivax could tell that by looking around him that things were beginning to move in the right direction. He still remembered the expressions of worry and fear that he had grown used to seeing on the faces of Dalaran's natives after the start of the war. The Alliance was more than holding its own and had achieved many successes on the battlefield, but that did little to comfort those who lived in constant fear of losing their loved ones to the Horde. After the Horde seemed to form some kind of alliance with the forest trolls of Zulaman, that fear had reached new heights. There had been a brief boost to morale when Azrael-Nerub announced its intention to declare war on the Horde several months ago, but that boost faded when it became clear there would be few immediate changes. Aside from the lengthy investigations that the High King had to conduct into the Order's history and activities, there was a lot of logistical work that needed to be done to properly prepare a kingdom for war. Food needed to be stockpiled, weapons needed to be forged, and transportation needed to be accounted for. It turns out that while portals were perfectly fine for transporting a relatively small number of important individuals, consistently transporting entire armies was a monumental task. Not only that, but it was difficult to open multiple permanent portals to the same place due to the interactions that portals had on ley lines. The Dark Portal was an extreme exception, given that it was created by one of the most powerful mages in the Warcraft franchise, who also just happened to be possessed by an evil god. Dalaran was quite capable, but they couldn't quite compare to that. Things would have been far easier if Azrael-Nerub was able to transport its army over the sea, but Azrael-Nerub's navy was still pretty much in the planning stages and the Alliance navy was already in full deployment against the Horde. Despite all of these difficulties, the portal between Dalaran and Inkilla had been in a state of nearly constant use for the past few months, and Azrael-Nerub's contributions to the war effort were steadily increasing. The effect of this had been profound for the people of the Eastern Kingdoms, who now looked to the future with a sense of optimism and hope that they lacked just a few months ago. Krivax knew that the Alliance would have prevailed over the Horde even without Azrael-Nerub's help, but he still couldn't help but feel proud of his accomplishments whenever he looked at the smiling faces of the pedestrians. Krivax felt his mood brighten further as he spotted one of his favorite new developments to happen in the past few months. "Ms. Sherwood, how's business today?" Krivax asked as he diverted from his path to approach the kindly old woman who was standing behind a food stall. "Business has been good, dear. Especially with you stopping by so often," Ms. Sherwood said with a fond smile. "Would you like your usual, or are you willing to try something new? I just received a shipment of silverpine fireflies, and I'd like to hear the opinion of my favorite customer." Most people were still generally uncomfortable being around Nerubians, but Miss Sherwood seemed to be a notable exception. Krivax had noticed that the looks that he received from the common folk were gradually growing more friendly ever since Azrael-Nerub started fighting the Horde in earnest, so had hoped that Miss Sherwood would not be an exception forever. "Well, I do enjoy trying new things," said Krivax as he handed over a few Lordrenian copper pieces. "And I've never been disappointed by any of your goods." Miss Sherwood chuckled and presented him with a piece of freshly baked bread filled with faintly glowing insects. "Oh, there's no need to flatter an old woman like me." Krivax took a bite of the bread and immediately let out a sigh of satisfaction. It was a bit difficult for him to recall exactly what things used to taste like when he was human after living as a Nerubian for over 6 years, but he had no complaints as far as food went in his second life. "It's delicious, Miss Sherwood," said Krivax, sharing his honest opinion. "I'm sure it will sell well with all of the new Nerubians passing through the city." The number of Nerubians in Dalaran had soared since Azrael-Nerub's entry into the war, and there was no shortage of merchants looking to make money accommodating them. "Oh, I'm sure it will, dear, but money's not why I do this," said Miss Sherwood. "I'm just a baker, and these insects are still rather expensive. I doubt that I'll make very much profit when all's said and done." "If it's not profitable, then why are you baking specifically for Nerubians?" Krivax asked curiously. "Well, my grandson's a mage and he's been sent off to fight the Horde," said Miss Sherwood, her expression a mixture of pride and sadness. "The boy tries to ease my heart by sending back letters, but I can't help but worry for him. I hear from my friends all the time about how dangerous those monsters are, and I've been to too many funerals lately. I could tell from his letters early on in the war that he wasn't expecting to come back home." Krivax was filled with a wave of sympathy as he listened to the old woman's story. "I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Sherwood." "Don't be, dear," said the old woman, shaking her head. "I'm luckier than most, and things are starting to look better thanks to you spiderfolk. My grandson told me that it's thanks to you folk that there were any survivors after what happened over in Tol Barad. I think you should thank the Alliance Navy for that, Miss Sherwood, Krivax said honestly. Tol Barad was an island south of Gilneas whose population was nearly completely slaughtered by the Horde. While it was true that the scouting capabilities of the Alliance Navy's Nerubian flyers allowed them to discover the attack almost immediately, the actual fighting had been done by the Alliance. I'd thank them too if they were here in front of me, but that doesn't change the fact that you folk are helping us, said Miss Sherwood, her tone chiding. Besides, that ain't all you've done. My grandson fought down in Hillsprad, and he told me all about how one of those big beetle fellas helped them fight off the greenskins. I can't do much to show my appreciation, but the least I can do is make sure I'm selling something you folk like to eat. Krivax felt touched. He didn't have very many opportunities lately to speak with the common people of the Eastern Kingdoms given his position, so it was nice to hear evidence that he was actually impacting Azeroth in a positive way. Krivax only hoped that continued to be the case. Where is your grandson fighting now? Is he still in Hillsprad? He was, but the Alliance has decided to send him to help over in Quel'Thalas, Miss Sherwood said before her expression suddenly turned pleading. I'm not sure what you can tell me, but have you heard anything about how things are going over there? I've heard that those nasty trolls are fighting with the Horde now. After failing to conquer the Hillsprad foothills, the Horde had freed a troll warlord by the name of Zul'jin from some Alliance keep before traveling east to the hinterlands. From there, they made the mistake of antagonizing the Wildhammer dwarves, who quickly set upon them with their griffin riders. The Horde took significant casualties until they managed to increase their number of undead dragons and contest the Wildhammer's air superiority. However, the hinterlands was not the Horde's main objective and they quickly began marching further north toward Quel'Thalas. Krivax didn't exactly remember everything that had happened during the Second War, but it didn't take a genius to realize why the Horde was attacking the elves. The Horde needed the forest trolls to help them pass through lands that they were unfamiliar with quickly, and Zul'jin considered Quel'Thalas to be their mortal enemies. Krivax had been reading reports of the ongoing battles, and it seemed clear to him that the war was reaching its most bloody period. The Horde had finally managed to transfer the bulk of its forces across Barradin Bay and was attempting to completely overwhelm the Alliance with their superior numbers. With the aid of the forest trolls, they had managed to inflict a humiliating defeat on Quel'Thalas, burning much of their countryside, and it seemed like the elves were being pushed back towards Silvermoon. Despite this, Krivax knew that Azrael Nerub was sending more and more troops to the Eastern Kingdoms with every passing day. Spiderlord and Jormungandr were effective in breaking Horde positions in any battle they participated in, and swarms of skitterers flooded over enemy lines. Time was decidedly not on the Horde side. Krivax thought about what he could and couldn't say before he responded. The fighting is at its bloodiest right now, but all signs point to things turning in the Alliance's favor soon. As long as we don't lose to Deathwing once we find the Dragon Soul, that is. Miss Sherwood thanked him for the reassuring news and gave him another piece of firefly bread to show her appreciation. Krivax said his farewells and once again began making his way to the Violet Hold with his spirits lifted. It didn't take long for Krivax to reach his destination and find himself being stopped by a pair of guards who asked him to state his name and business. Vizier Krivax with the Anomalous Magic Research Division, Krivax said with a hint of exasperation as he provided the name of the Order's successor organization. He wasn't quite sure if non-Nerubians were just that bad at distinguishing Nerubian features or if security was just that strict since this was a prison, but the guards continued to ask his name even though he'd visited the Violet Hold many times. I'm here to request a progress report from Archmage Kel'Thuzad and Queen Kha'Zix down in Level 4. Krivax couldn't help but sympathize as he watched the guards stiffen once he mentioned Level 4, which was one of the deepest portions of the Violet Hold, which was where the Kirin Tor ran the most intensive of its experiments on their most dangerous prisoners. The Circle of Viziers had negotiated a research agreement with the Kirin Tor, and there was now a significant amount of cooperation between the two organizations when it came to research of all kinds, especially magical. The last time that Krivax had seen Kel'Thuzad and Queen Kha'Tix, the two of them had been thoroughly and joyfully examining a Death Knight, so he could see why most people would not want to have anything to do with level 4. The guards quickly checked his credentials and examined him for any mind-altering and shape-shifting magic, along with a variety of other magics, before sending him on his way. Once he was inside, Krivax immediately began making his way past the various guards, researchers and of course, prisoners and test subjects in their cells behind bars and violet-colored arcane barriers. Level 1 was mainly filled with regular criminals, a variety of non-magical animals that were generally used for experimentation, and other mundane things. He wasn't surprised to see that many of the researchers were Nerubians, as his new organization often had personnel moving throughout the Violet Hold. The newly formed Anomalous Magic Research Division had been named in a way that was deliberately similar to the other divisions of the Circle of Viziers. From an outside perspective, the division was a response to the discovery of the light and was responsible for researching it and any other strange forms of magic that Azrael Nerub might be exposed to during its exploration of the world outside of Northrend. And while they did devote some of their resources to the study of the light and several other new discoveries, especially after discovering how it interacted with the void, the Anomalous Magic Research Division had a few notable differences from other divisions. While most divisions had regional branches for each city, there was only one Anomalous Magic Research Division, and they answered directly to the High King. The only regional branches were the Northrend and Eastern Kingdom branches, while the Kalimdor branch was expected to be created once contact was made with the continent. Honestly, Krivax wasn't completely certain why the High King chose to set things up this way, but he knew that there was an annoying amount of politics and bureaucracy involved. But whatever his motivations, it seemed like the only ones who knew that the division was the successor organization to the Order of Kalchut were those who were supposed to know. It was honestly quite impressive. Following Krivax's conversation with the High King, he and Hadix had been transferred to the Eastern Kingdom's branch of the division. Neither one of them was particularly upset by this. Hadix was happy as long as the void was being confronted and Krivax hadn't actually seen that much change to his daily duties, at least not yet. Azrael Nerub had ultimately decided that he was more valuable in his role as a diplomat than anywhere else and had seen fit to leave him there, for which he was grateful. He knew for a fact that, based on what Hadix told him, many other former members of the Order were not particularly pleased with their various reassignments. Unfortunately for them, they would either learn to adapt or the High King would make his displeasure known. Hadix trusted his colleagues to learn to play ball with their new lot in life quickly. Or not, Krivax had gotten the feeling that his mentor didn't particularly care one way or another if they chose to act foolishly, as he put it. It was one of the few times that Krivax didn't mind being overlooked due to his relatively young age, since it resulted in the High King viewing him as low risk. His meeting with the High King, and his subsequent meeting with the Council, had already been tense enough for Krivax to know he much preferred to not be the subject of the High King's attention. Krivax's musing was cut short as he passed through the portal that would take him directly down to level 4. The Violet Hold was specifically warded to prevent teleportation in and out of prison, but specialized portals still allowed for internal teleportation, and could be activated and deactivated as necessary. Basically like a magical high-security elevator. He could feel highly complex wards run over him to once again check him for a variety of magics once he arrived on the other side of the portal. Although level 4 wasn't designed much differently from any other level in the Violet Hold, Krivax immediately felt more tense. Not only was level 4 mostly empty of activity and the prisoners vastly more dangerous, but he could also feel something watching him whenever he was there. Krivax had once asked Archmage Kel'Thuzad about where that feeling came from, but the only answer that he had received was that it was security. Krivax hurriedly skittered through halls, intent on getting his business done as quickly as possible. After passing by one cell that contained what to be a Naga sea witch and another that contained a massive fire elemental, Krivax turned down the hallway that led toward his destination. Even if this had been his first time making this trip, Krivax would know that he was headed in the right direction by the increasing amount of anomalous entities contained within. Primarily, these entities were things that both Azrael Nerub and the Dalaran had little experience in, such as the previously unknown races of the Horde, the necromantic magic of the Death Knights, and the Void in general. Krivax paused outside Kel'Thuzad's primary laboratory and shuddered as he spotted a void-corrupted creature that vaguely resembled a male dwarf. Fascinating creature, isn't it? Krivax flinched in surprise and turned to see Archmage Kel'Thuzad standing at the entrance of his lab. It was captured recently by a Nerubian and delivered to us for examination, said Kel'Thuzad, either not noticing Krivax's discomfort or choosing to ignore it completely. Although I find myself to be far more interested in necromantic magic than I am in shadow magic, or void as you Nerubians refer to it, I do believe there's much that we can learn from its study. Did you know that despite appearing superficially to be a corrupted dwarf, this creature could actually be considered an entirely different species? No? There are many examples of creatures with magically altered physiologies that we know of resulting in reproductively viable creatures, but such a thing is usually difficult to replicate artificially, said Archmage Kel'Thuzad, his normally dull eyes lighting up at the topic. But when one is using the void, there seems to be an exception. These creatures seem to be entirely capable of reproduction, and their offspring are born similarly corrupted to themselves. Reproducing this result with the void is extremely simple. Queen Kha'Tix was extremely delighted when we discovered this phenomenon. That's nice, Archmage. I'm glad to hear that your experiments are producing results, said Krivax, trying his best not to think about how exactly they managed to discover that phenomenon. As my research has been much more productive since the Kirin Tor began cooperating with your people, said Kel'Thuzad. The Archmage abruptly turned and began walking back into his lab with Krivax quickly following behind him after a moment of hesitation. The laboratory itself was well lit and filled with tools fit for magical research and shelves that contained a variety of spellbooks lined the walls. There was a workbench that seemed to hold a mortar and pestle, as well as numerous vials that held an assortment of strangely colored alchemical substances. Enchanted tools, most of which Krivax was unable to recognize, were all organized neatly in a corner of the room. Honestly, Kel'Thuzad's laboratory would have looked far more ordinary than he had expected, if not for its occupants. Krivax glanced over at the massive form of Queen Kha'Tix, who was currently looming over the dismembered torso of a Death Knight that was being magically suspended in the air over an arcane glyph. The Death Knight's limbs were also suspended near his torso, giving him the appearance of some kind of doll that a malicious child had chosen to tear apart. As generally horrifying as the sight was, it was made worse by the fact that the Death Knight was still alive and was glaring at Queen Kha'Tix with a mixture of hatred and despair. Death Knights were extremely difficult to kill and didn't need to worry about mundane concerns like eating or bleeding out. While the Queen was nominally Krivax's superior in the Anomalous Magic Research Division, she seemed content to ignore him in favor of doing whatever she was doing with the Death Knight. Aside from the Queen and her test subject, the only other occupant in the room was a cat that was calmly lounging in a corner of the laboratory. While I do enjoy speaking about my research, I am quite busy, so I believe it would be best if we moved on to business. How may I help you, Vizier Krivax? Asked Kel'Thuzad, drawing Krivax's attention away from the strange sight. I've been sent to request an update on the progress of your research in regard to Project Dragonseeker and Project Reanimation, said Krivax. Given that he was both a diplomat and a member of the Anomalous Magic Research Division, he was the most logical choice to act as a liaison between the division and the Kirin Tor. The Archmage rarely left his laboratory without reason and had a tendency to become engrossed in his work, so there was a need to occasionally send someone to personally receive progress reports. Kel'Thuzad's expression twisted into one of displeasure. Project Reanimation has seen little progress. While it's a relatively simple thing to create an alchemical substance that affects the undead, it is much more difficult to create a substance that can affect the undead while not also affecting the living. While I am quite certain that it's possible, achieving success will take more time than expected. Project Deanimation referred to Kel'Thuzad's efforts to create an alchemical poison that only affected the undead, which was something that very much interested Krivax for obvious reasons. Channeling the Archmage's fascination with the undead into something constructive was definitely a step in the right direction as far as he was concerned. It was disappointing to hear that the project was making little progress, but such a result was probably to be expected. If it was so easy to create such a poison, then the Lich King would not have been near as much of a threat as he actually was. As for Project Dragonseeker, we have made the opposite of progress. I'm nearly certain that it is impossible, said Kel'Thuzad, causing Krivax to let out a sigh of disappointment. Project Dragonseeker was an attempt to develop divination rituals that could both accurately detect the location of things being hidden by the void over long distances and pierce through void-based anti-divination wards. The Order of Kalchut had been working on similar rituals for most of its history, but only achieved limited results. There had been some hope that collaboration between a wide range of researchers would have been more successful, but it seemed like that wasn't going to be the case. According to our experiments, the void seems to naturally gain a certain degree of sentience once it reaches sufficient levels of concentration, Kel'Thuzad continued to explain. Any spells that we create are simply adapted to and overcome. The divination ritual that Azrael Nerub provided to us is likely already the limit of what is possible. Improving on it further is impossible unless we are somehow able to create arcane spells with similar degrees of intelligence, and that is far beyond our capabilities. The void just seems to be remarkably well suited to this manner of magic. Krivax was once again disappointed, but still not particularly surprised. As far as he was concerned, attempting to find the dragon soul with arcane magic was a fool's errand given that Malygos would have likely already done so if it were possible. Thank you, Archmage. I will be sure to pass your words on to Vizier Haedix and the rest of the Council of Six as soon as possible. If there's nothing further, then I'll allow you to return to your research, said Krivax, more than ready to leave. Before you go, Vizier Krivax, there is one thing that I'd like to know, said Kel'Thuzad, stopping Krivax in place. Given the failure of Project Dragonseeker, I would like to know whether or not any of our other efforts to locate the dragon soul have been met with more success. Together with the dragonflights, we've managed to narrow it down greatly and eliminate a lot of possibilities, but we still haven't found it, Krivax said grimly. Even though he had always known that his meta-knowledge would gradually become less and less useful, it was still frustrating to not know something so important. Lord Malygos seems to believe that the dragon soul is most likely somewhere with the Horde. According to him, Deathwing would favor keeping it somewhere that is well defended and easily accessible rather than relying purely on subterfuge. There had been a few proposals to send in spies to look for the dragon soul, but there was too great a risk of them being discovered and their memory searched. That is unfortunate, said Kel'Thuzad, a hint of worry creeping into his voice. Regardless of anything else, Deathwing was a threat that everyone in Azeroth needed to worry about. The longer that he remained alive, the worse things were going to get. But I suppose there's nothing more to be done about it. If we've managed to narrow down the location to somewhere within the Horde, then I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we find it. Krivax hoped that would be the case. He truly didn't know how he would deal with it if his actions actually resulted in a worse outcome for Azeroth. After saying his farewells to the Archmage, Krivax made his way out of the Violet Hold in a worse mood than when he went in and feeling a bit worried for the future. However, he had one more errand to handle for the day, so Krivax forced himself to focus on the present instead of on his pessimistic thoughts. During his first visit to the city, he had hired a few goblins from the venture company to go out and find something for him, and Krivax had just recently received a letter back from them claiming success. Weaving a ward around himself that would allow him to walk through the streets relatively unnoticed, Krivax quickly began making his way to the underbelly. Situated deep within the Nexus, an ancient fortress that served as the Blue Dragonflight's ancestral home, the aspect of magic listened wearily as an excited young dragon spoke about his time in Dalaran. Malygos found it slightly easier to speak with Kulkos than the other members of his flight. The whelp still looked at him with the same undeserved reverence as the others, but he at least lacked their pity. Even his fellow aspects alternated between treating Malygos like he was a wounded animal or a mana bomb that threatened to explode at any moment. Can you really blame them? You spent the past 10,000 years wallowing in sorrow and forsaking your duties. Why would they look at you any other way? As was slowly starting to become a habit since he had left his lair, Malygos quickly cast a spell on himself to search for the void's influence, only to find nothing. His aberrant thoughts seemed to be nothing more than the symptoms of a mind that had been deteriorating for millennia. Malygos forced himself not to think about that and focused his attention on Kulkos. The whelp was supposed to be giving him a briefing on the ongoings of that mortal city, but he seemed to be more interested in talking about something else. Malygos listened for a few moments as Kulkos went on about how fascinating the mortals were and how glad he was that he was able to interact with them without hiding the fact that he was a dragon. As interesting as this is, I believe we veered off topic, said Malygos, interrupting the young dragon and causing an embarrassed expression to grow on his face that reminded Malygos too much of his youngest son, Umbra. Holding back a growl of frustration, Malygos sullenly cast a quick memory recollection spell. As soon as the spell was finished, he was suddenly bombarded with memories of his youngest son Umbreskul, who was currently still alive but sleeping in stasis after suffering the incurable effects of a magical accident. While you indulged in your misery, your own son was forgotten. What would Sindragosa think if she was still alive? Malygos forced himself to ignore the reminder of another family member who he had failed and focused on the present. I apologize, Lord Malygos, Kulkos said guiltily. My thoughts have a tendency to get away from me at times. It is quite all right, young one, said Malygos, struggling to keep his voice gentle. That is quite common among members of our flight and is something that will become easier to control with age. But please, focus on telling me about our efforts to search for the dragon soul. The mere mention of the artifact that had been used to slaughter most of his flight threatened to throw Malygos into a rage, but he forced himself to control his emotions as best he could before young Kulkos. Oh, right. Queen Alexstrasza said that we're pretty close to finding it, Kulkos said seriously. We think the dragon soul is probably being held by the Twilight Hammer clan given that they seem to be void practitioners, but we're not really certain. Malygos thought about it and decided that it sounded like something that Nelthorion would do. The dragon soul needed to be kept within mortal hands in order to be effective, and those who were already corrupted by the void would be the easiest for Nelthorion to control. Have you delivered my proposal to her about the Dragonsworn? How did she respond? Said Malygos, his mind sorting through the magical artifacts contained within the Nexus Vault. Alexstrasza had refused at first to send her Dragonsworn to search for the dragon soul among the Horde, citing concerns that any spies that were sent would be captured and have their minds plundered by Nelthorion. She worried that if their traitorous brother discovered how close they were to finding the dragon soul, then he would move it elsewhere and they would need to spend several more months searching for it. It was a reasonable concern, so Malygos developed a spell that would utterly destroy the soul of the mortal as soon as they were captured. Unfortunately, the existence of necromancy made it necessary to go to such great lengths when keeping secrets. Raising intelligent undead was not perfectly reliable and suicide was not exactly uncommon among spies, so such a spell should not cause undue suspicion. As long as Nelthorion was unable to read their mind, then it would be impossible for him to distinguish the Dragonsworn from the rest of the mortals who were undoubtedly spying on the Horde. When Kulkos failed to answer, Malygos turned his attention to the younger dragon's hesitant expression and instantly knew that he was about to hear something unpleasant. Speak, Kulkos. Well, Queen Alexstrasza is refusing to send in any Dragonsworn. Malygos instantly lost control of his anger and his voice thundered across the Nexus. What? Does she not understand how important this is? What reason could she possibly have for such a foolish decision? Queen Alexstrasza said the risk is too high and your methods are too cruel, Kulkos said nervously. Malygos immediately let out a bellowing roar filled with anger and frustration. Alexstrasza was always like this, choosing to hold on to her soft-hearted views when the fate of the world was hanging in the balance. Who cared about the souls of a few mortals? What had they ever done aside from allowing their greed and foolishness to shatter the world? They didn't lose as much as you did. Their flights aren't shattered like yours. Malygos didn't know for how long he raged, but by the time he was done, much of his lair had been destroyed and Kulkos was backed into a corner and huddled behind an arcane barrier. The sight instantly doused any remnants of anger within him and replaced them with guilt. "Lord Malygos, are you all right now?" Kulkos asked tentatively, releasing his barrier. "Yes, I am," Malygos said regretfully. "I apologize, Kulkos. I did not intend to frighten you. I understand. Even while you were enraged, you still avoided attacking anything near me," said Kulkos, seemingly unaffected by the situation. "I know that things have been difficult for our flight, so moments like this are to be expected. I trust you not to hurt me, Lord Malygos." Malygos wished that he shared Kulkos' faith. There were times that he felt as if he wanted nothing more than to destroy everything around him, and he didn't trust himself to avoid spreading that desire to his flight. Malygos listened patiently as Kulkos finished sharing Alexstrasza's decision. Apparently, she wished to meet with him in a few days to discuss a new plan for finding the dragon soul. After agreeing to meet with Alexstrasza, he quickly sent the younger dragon away and began considering his options. If Alexstrasza was so reluctant to risk the lives of mortals, then there was little that they could actually do to verify the dragon soul's location. If the Twilight Hammer clan was truly corrupted by the void, then it would be difficult for Ysera to see into their dreams, and Mazdormu never shared any information that he didn't wish to. In the space of a few moments, Malygos considered half a dozen plans before dismissing them as being either too immoral for Alexstrasza to accept or simply too unfeasible. Do they not see how important this is? As far as Malygos was concerned, every moment that Nelthorion remained alive felt like torture. There wasn't a moment when the knowledge that his traitorous brother was still alive while most of his flight remained dead wasn't tearing at Malygos' mind. If you wish to kill Nelthorion, then you will need to take a risk. He already knew that if he was to inform his fellow aspects about what he was currently considering, they would not react well. For good reason. Malygos likely knew more about the dragon soul's magic than any other being on Azeroth, aside from Nelthorion. He was the one who convinced his siblings to imbue the artifact with their power, something that he had only done after a thorough examination. That was why Malygos was certain of his ability to resist the dragon soul's effect long enough for him to escape if such a thing ever became necessary. Given that, was there anything preventing Malygos from going to search for it himself? He was perfectly capable of casting an invisibility spell that could fool even the greatest of mortal mages. With reckless plans forming in his mind, he began making his way to the Nexus Vault. Because after 10 millennia of doing nothing, Malygos intended to take action. No matter the cost.